I spent over a quarter of a century here at FIU, and for those who are keeping count, that's half of my life. And I've seen profound changes, but there are some things that have also remained the same. When I started my career here, there were about 17,000 students and less than 10 buildings. We now have 3 times as many students and 10 times the number of buildings. One thing that hasn't changed is the fact that we have outstanding faculty here at FIU that are able to do amazing things with very limited resources. I've always said that administrators come and go, but the one thing that remains constant is the faculty. Many faculty who have been here for a quarter of a century, like myself, were here when I came here, and they're still here. And I've developed lifelong relationships with them. I'm very proud to be part of such an esteemed group of individuals. I take very seriously my role as Chief Academic Officer of this institution, and I assure you that I will work tirelessly to move us forward. The next 5 years are going to be the most important half-decade of my life. I do feel privileged to serve you and own my responsibility for the oversight of how we create knowledge, facilitate knowledge acquisition, and certify knowledge. Our academy is experiencing the most disruption it has ever had to endure. There's been a paradigm shift in our world, and we must be responsive. Disruptions such as shifts in how universities are funded, shifts in how students select schools, shifts in how information is obtained. Ultimately, it leads to the question of what it means to provide not just a good education, but a valuable one. Universities across the nation are under a tremendous amount of pressure. If we are strategic, FIU will be in position to capitalize on all of this disruption, and we will become one of the best universities in the world. But if we do not choose wisely, or if we delay too long in making our decisions, our institution could be in peril. As you're probably aware, the state legislature has adopted a new performance funding methodology that ranks all of the state universities. Essentially, each university gets a report card. And the metrics are things such as the second-year retention of our students, the 6-year graduation rate, the percentage of our students that are employed within a year, and their median wages. We know it is skewed to benefit a select few, or should I say a select two. We know it doesn't take into account who we are or who we serve. But right now, this is our new reality. Last year, $100 million was taken from all of the 12 universities in the state system. And this year, the Board of Governors just announced that they're doubling down and that the amount at risk will double this year to $200 million. At this rate, you can do the math, and the entire state appropriation could be at stake within 4 to 5 years. Now, we can debate whether or not this will happen, but I'd rather focus on getting better in any case. I'd rather focus on our students' success. I'd rather focus on finding a better way to operate efficiently. I'd rather focus on supporting our faculty and leveraging their talent and on our commitment to achieving our goals. My goal is to fully understand what it will take for FIU to not only be competitive, but to thrive despite of this performance reality that we have to deal with. So yes, I enter my provostship with a sense of urgency. Some of you may have already picked up on that, or you know my boss. But I want you to know that I enter this provostship with energy and optimism as well. I am optimistic for our future. I am confident that FIU will lead the way. I am confident that we will rise to the challenge, and once again, we will surprise everyone at what we are able to accomplish. I know that we have world-class faculty and exceptional students, and with the right blueprint and the right leadership, we will continue our rise as one of the world's largest, as well as the world's best public research university. But there will be plenty of time for us to talk about all of those plans. So today is about the faculty. Today is about the work that we do as faculty that makes us the cornerstone to this great institution of higher education. So since I have the platform this afternoon, I wanted to take a little bit of time to share with you about my road to the academy and then a little bit about my research, including the elephants. Also about my students and why I really do feel privileged to serve you and serve our FIU as your provost. My hope is that you will walk away with a better understanding of who I am and what I want to do for you and for our institution. I started here as an FIU assistant professor of chemistry in 1988, but I've always thought that I wanted to be a doctor. In fact, some of you may have seen my license plate. It says Dr. Ken, or you may have heard my students refer to me as Dr. Ken. A lot of people think that happened when I got my PhD, that I started being, but it turns out that started when I was 10 years old. My mom made me a little statue of an actual doctor with a white coat, and on the pocket it said Dr. Ken, and it was sitting in my room since I was 10 years old. My mother was head of medical records as a medical transcriptionist and wanted me to be a doctor. What she didn't know is I actually never really wanted to be a doctor. The thought of making a single mistake that could possibly result in somebody's serious injury or death made me feel extremely uneasy. But of course, like any kid, I wanted to make my parents happy. So when I landed my early admissions to the University of Central Florida, they asked me what my major was. I said pre-med, and they said there is no pre-med major. And I said, so I looked through the catalog and I saw forensic science. So I said, that's great, I like Quincy, and being a forensic scientist sounds pretty cool. So like many of our students, maybe I didn't take as much time as I should have in choosing my major, but I know we're working on that. And like most of our students, I did not come from a family that had a history of family members getting college degrees. My parents taught me the value of an education, but they couldn't guide me on making tough college decisions. I was a certified EMT, a lifeguard, and I worked in a movie theater at night to help pay my way through school. And I was also painfully shy. And I know when I say that, people think I'm joking, but I really was. And I look at my students, and I look at many of our students, and I say, man, if I can do it, they can do it. They just need to be shown the way. And going through the IREL Commission visioning process, and now the Beyond Possible 2020 strategic planning process, I realized how many of my experiences at school made me who I am today. Through my university experiences, I've learned to compensate for my shyness, but even now before you, I'm actually very nervous and outside my comfort zone. Student success at large public universities like ours pivots around a sense of community, a sense of belonging. We need to create an environment where our students know they are welcomed, where they're wanted, and most of all, that they're not alone. So I early on joined a fraternity at UCF. And as much as that may sound trivial to some, the camaraderie, the forced organization, the rituals, the ceremonies made me feel like I was part of something important. I learned leadership skills and also teamwork. And to this day, I have that brotherhood, a support network. And I actually just stepped down as High Pi, which is the fraternity's head advisor appointed by nationals after serving 13 years for the fraternity chapter here on campus, so that I could focus my attention as your new provost. That brotherhood helped me begin to come out of my shell and to feel like I belonged at UCF. Another thing our students need is access to internships and experiential learning. My first taste of research was at the undergraduate level, doing arson analysis, working with my undergraduate mentor, Professor Chris Clausen. I started to work with him because I saw a little ad, a little flyer on the bulletin board asking if you wanted to earn extra money, and I said, sure. And I worked in his chemistry lab on this funded arson project, and what I remember was I was just blown away by the fact that one could actually discover something. I mean, who gets a chance to be the first one in the world to develop something that nobody else has ever seen? I was immediately hooked on research and fascinated by that. In my senior year, I interned at Detroit Police Headquarters Crime Lab. It was like a dream. I'm originally from Detroit, and my grandfather was a police chief at a suburban town outside of Detroit, so I felt like I was paying homage to him as well. But that internship changed my life. It made me realize I hated forensic science. Well, at least I hated the lab work in forensic science. And I know I was shy and I didn't really like to talk to people, so you'd think I'd like to be kind of holed up in a lab, but I found that repetitive analysis work, doing the same thing over and over, it really felt like corporal punishment to me. So early on, my mentor in the crime lab, Gloria Reynolds, who later became the crime lab director, saw that I wasn't quite cutting it out as a lab scientist and that I enjoyed research, and suggested that I went across the street and apply to Wayne State University to do an advanced degree. Wayne State University had one of the best analytical chemistry programs in the country, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to go do my PhD with Professor Colin Poole, who was one of the world's leading chromatographers, which was the technique I did on my arson project. Unfortunately, the graduate program director in the Department of Chemistry told me that Dr. Poole's lab was full and I had to pick somebody else. So I informed him then I might have to pick another school, because that was really the only place I wanted to go. And so he had a change of heart, and I joined Professor Poole's laboratory. Again, that decision changed my life. Dr. Poole took me on my first international trip, where we visited chromatography conferences in Oslo, Norway, and Edinburgh, Scotland. I'd never been out of the country. I thought, who gets to do this? We get to travel to an international destination on our grants and network and learn about the field from the scientists at the cutting edge of their field. It was really amazing. It broadened my horizons, and I got to see really what top-ranked research laboratories and scientists and students look like from all around the world. I was also able to witness my advisor, Dr. Poole, getting what's called the Sweat Chromatography Medal. It's TSWETT, it's not a sweat medal. But it's essentially like the Nobel Prize in separation science. He was the youngest person ever to receive this award, and I was proud of him. I was proud of myself also for being one of his students. It's something I'll always remember. And so I was able to complete my PhD, and I was just a kid at 24 years old when I completed my doctorate. But I figured I was ready to go into industry and started applying for jobs. But Dr. Poole told me, no, you should go and do a postdoc. I didn't even know what a postdoc was. But he said, no, you should go and work with another scientist, broaden your horizons, ideally do it overseas. And in the end, really I was thinking about it, at the end of the day, he gave me the gift of choice, of options. So I listened to him, I trusted him, and I went to work with Howard Purnell at the University of Wales in Swansea. Dr. Purnell was a world-renowned separation scientist who just happened to have an opportunity for a research project funded by British Nuclear Fuels related to spent nuclear fuel a new spent nuclear fuel reprocessing technique. When I got to Wales, I was handed a book from the previous postdoc, and it was labeled, I don't know quite how to say this, the late Dr. So-and-so, who was no longer with us. Apparently, he had blown himself up in the middle of the project and passed on. And I was given my own laboratory with windows that looked out into a little courtyard, and on the other side of the courtyard was Professor Purnell's main lab. And my job was to develop a technique that hopefully wouldn't blow up the lab and that they could complete this project for BNFL. Of course, I really didn't want to blow myself up, so I miniaturized the project and thought I was doing pretty well, but my mentor, Professor Purnell, was a chain smoker, so he'd walk in with a lit cigarette every once in a while into my laboratory, and I would just stop for a minute and then say, oh, thank God I'm still alive. The other thing about this project, it turns out, is that the byproducts that were produced were hydrogen cyanide and hydrozoic acid, which is an extremely explosive material known to spontaneously detonate. So I had a little injector pen with an antidote, so if I were to disappear out of sight, then the students were supposed to run around, inject me with the antidote so that I could continue my research. They didn't really have any solution for the lit cigarette mentor coming in to visit me. So luckily I didn't blow myself up and I didn't need any injections and I completed the project. And I started getting offers to go to industry and academia. And I narrowed it down to two final positions. One was Pfizer Pharmaceuticals as a laboratory a research supervisor position, and also the FIU assistant professor of chemistry at roughly half the salary that Pfizer was offering me. So I went into Professor Purnell and said, hey, I'm going to Pfizer. I got this great offer. And he said, no, you're not. He said, you're going to FIU. You can kind of see his theme emerging, right? He told me that if I go to FIU and I don't like it, next year Pfizer would still take me, but not the other way around. If I go to Pfizer, FIU's offer would probably not be available, or I'd get used to making the salary and never go into research. He also said, in academia, you can do your own research. You can do what you're passionate about, and that FIU was a growing institution, and I could make a mark if I came here to FIU. So I'm standing here today as your provost, and I tell you the story, and I thank you for indulging me, because I am the product of great mentorship. I'm the product of the power of internships, even if it's what you learn that you don't want to do. And I'm also the product of experiential learning. But my experiences in the labs in Orlando, Detroit, and Wales led me here. It opened my eyes. It changed my perspective. I had no idea you could have a career as a professor, but I eventually ended up at this young university. And the person who hired me was Dr. Len Keller. I want to thank you for hiring me, and congratulations again on your well-deserved award. And Professor Purnell was right. Coming here, I was able to help start the PhD in chemistry. I got to create the International Forensic Research Institute. I got to create a unique college with 3 interdisciplinary schools. And now I have the great honor of helping to create the next strategy for FIU, the next 5-year strategic plan that will lay the foundation for the next 50 years of FIU's history. I am humbled by this institution's profound thirst for more, and I'm also energized by it. I know we can do this. I know we can help our students learn better and graduate more quickly. I know we can give our students experiences that will set them on a path of a lifetime of success. And I know that we can continue to recruit the very best faculty. And I also know that we will one day be a Carnegie Very High Research University. And that's why I feel privileged to be your provost, because I know we have great faculty, and working together, we will achieve these goals. I also know it won't be easy. The times ahead will be full of very tough choices. I will ask you to do things that you may not agree with and things that you will definitely be uncomfortable with. But in certain circumstances, I will ask you to do it anyway. I did not want to say no to Pfizer. I did not want to leave my lab to become an assistant dean. And I did not want to give up teaching classes. But I pushed myself. I took a leap of faith. I believed the sacrifices I was making were for a good reason. And it's funny, once you make the decision to do something, then really the hardest part is over. So today, my biggest struggle is trying to balance the sense of urgency with the true pace of change that's going on in higher education. But you have my commitment to never stop pushing us forward. You have my commitment to working together and knowing that I'll always expect more of myself than I would from anyone else. And speaking of making tough decisions, I have continued to mentor undergraduate and PhD students while I was dean, but I think it was because I was paying it forward, thinking, what if Professor Poole didn't let me work in his laboratory? And I will be scaling back my research to take on this role, but I'm sure I will always be involved in a more limited way. Which leads me to the last portion of my comments. I wanted to mention a little bit about my research. I have been able to complete with all of my outstanding FIU students some very interesting research projects. And since I'm a forensic scientist, many of these discoveries have also been able to be used in courts of law. So as you heard from my mentors, my specialty is separation science, and I applied that to scent detection. My expertise has mostly been used by law enforcement for drugs and explosives detection, but it stretches into other areas. I call it the A, B, C, D, E, and F, which is arson, biologicals, such as bacteria and fungi, currency, drugs, explosives, and flesh, both dead and alive. I work mostly with dogs, but as you heard from the president, I have branched out in recent years into other animals. And I also work with very sophisticated laboratory instruments with the idea of developing complex, understanding complex odor signatures and developing sensors. Dogs have remarkable capabilities, and research in my lab is focused on determining exactly what chemicals dogs use to locate items of interest, determining the thresholds, trying to improve the canines, and then trying to do complementary sensors. I actually thought I would, when I came to FIU, in 5 or 10 years I could develop sort of artificial dog's nose, and I now know that it will never happen in my lifetime. They're just an amazing apparatus that we can complement, but we can't replace. My early research focused on detecting drugs on money. Since most currency in circulation, if you may or may not be aware of, is contaminated with traces of cocaine. So if you take any money out of your pocket, 9 out of 10 bills have cocaine on them. And so the question came up, what do drug dogs do? Can they alert to the money that's in your pocket? And what we found was that dogs can't actually smell cocaine. They actually smell a breakdown product called methylbenzoate that comes from the breakdown of the cocaine molecule. And that methylbenzoate evaporates quickly. And so, and you have to have residual solvents present. So on currency, you have cocaine, but you don't have the odor of cocaine, versus a street sample of, say, either crack cocaine or cocaine hydrochloride will have the odor of cocaine. And so we've been able to show that dog alerts to currency are an indication of recent contamination or recent close proximity of money to illicit drug activity. And we've been able to develop patented calibration devices based on this research, and helped to develop international best practice guidelines on the proper use of dogs and sensors through a scientific working group that I've chaired over the last decade. We've also, of course, published many papers, and I've had numerous undergrads and grad students who've completed their degrees working on these projects. And we have been able to apply these new methods to casework, resulting in successful convictions. In the last couple of years, there was a Supreme Court ruling upholding the use of canines for probable cause, indicating the presence of illicit drug odor, and they cited the research of my students on this subject. And throughout the years, I have been called to testify on cases where large sums of money are alerted on by canines and to address this issue. One such testimony occurred in my hometown of Detroit, where I testified against some individuals who turned out to be associated with a mafia family. And they happened to have millions of dollars in safes behind their pizza restaurant. And it was challenged in court in terms of the admissibility of the science behind the odor of cocaine, and it was deemed admissible and actually assisted in the conviction of the individuals and the forfeiture of the currency to the United States government. I've also done extensive work on explosives detection using sensors in dogs, and most recently, I've extended this into studying the olfactory capability of other animals, including birds, and then most recently, elephants and even meerkats. And this came out of a funded project through the Department of Defense, in which it was noticed that elephants avoid landmine fields. And the question is, do they do that through learning, that they know maybe other elephants were injured and they know to stay away from certain areas? But it turns out they avoid other areas that other family members have never been. And so we have been able to show that elephants have the same or lower threshold for explosive detection than canines, and it's really sort of a partly basic science as well as an application, because it's hard to get your elephant in your police car. But the idea is, by using indigenous animals, you can work under extreme conditions, or you can work under clandestine conditions, because what happens is when the bad guy discovers that you have a dog that's doing the detection, then you take out the dog. But if you don't know whether it's a bird or a meerkat or an elephant, it makes it more difficult to keep track. And finally, my group has really been, in most recent years, has been heavily involved in identifying the chemical signature of human scent. And we've developed a patented method for identifying individuals based on the odor chemicals they leave behind. And the science behind this is that we're constantly shedding our skin cells. So we shed hundreds of skin cells every second. And those skin cells have been on the surface of your skin on typically a day or two, so they're saturated with your scent. And we've been able to show that each person has a unique primary odor chemicals that are given off, so that we can actually identify people based on the scent that they produce. And so wherever you go, you leave a little bit of you. In fact, in your lifetime, you'll lose 100 pounds of skin cells. And so the dogs can follow that. The length of time depends on the training, but for many days afterwards, the dogs can follow your scent. And we've been able to scientifically validate that. And then these dogs are used in many cases for investigations. And in one case that I worked, where the science was challenged, was a suspected serial killer in Alaska. And this killer murdered his victims in a particularly grisly fashion. And they found multiple victims that they attested to possibly to him. And in this case, the dogs were able to follow from an ATM machine that was used by the suspected perpetrator, and they followed a scent trail miles back to a home that, when they got a search warrant and checked it out, turned out there was a match to the ATM machine for somebody who had used the deceased card, and there was also DNA matching the victim. The admissibility of the scent evidence was challenged. In fact, I spent an entire week just in the pretrial hearing on the science behind it. And fortunately, I didn't have to go back for the trial, because in order to avoid the death penalty, the suspect confessed to the murder as well as other murders. And what was amazing was what we described in court that we believe was his trail, where he walked from the ATM back to his home. He said not only was that exactly where he went, but he said he was on his bike. He wasn't even walking. So the dogs were able to follow just the trail that he was left on his bike. So it is extremely satisfying to see, and pretty rare indeed, to see in your lifetime your research actually validated and the work of your students validated, and then also helping to solve a crime. And I have dozens of other case stories that I can tell you about over a beer at another time, because I want to conclude by really empathizing what a joy it has been to work on this body of research with our outstanding students and collaborations with many of our outstanding faculty, and how rewarding it's been for me to be a mentor to all of these great students and to pay forward what my mentors did for me. And I know each of us have our own stories about being mentored and mentoring, and I know the best is really yet to come. So I thank you for allowing me to address you today about my work as an educator, mentor, researcher, inventor, and sometimes crime fighter. And in preparation for this talk, I actually found out a lot about myself that I never really take the time to think about. And it ultimately reminded me about why I went into the academy. I didn't go into it because I always wanted to do this. I went into it because I discovered that I loved the pursuit of knowledge. I discovered that because I was pushed by the faculty mentors at my undergraduate level, as a doctoral student, and in my postdoc, and then here at FIU by many in this room as colleagues. And I look forward to working with all of you as we confront the challenges that lie ahead for us. The world ahead isn't the same as the world we are leaving behind. So I challenge us to think differently, to think about our students and what we can do to help them be more successful. And I ask you to support each other. I want to congratulate our colleagues on their awards again today, and I want to thank you for doing the important work for our institution. I'm proud of your body of work, and I'm honored to be your provost and your peer. So while I still have my Dr. Ken statue actually in my house, I am very thankful that I became a doctor of analytical chemistry and forensic science at our FIU. Thank you.